It's incredibly dangerous. I think there's a lot of movies where you walk away in slow motion and there's the giant fireball. It's just not like that. You have a split second to make a decision and it's right or wrong, and you know immediately if it's wrong. It's dangerous work. The work we all do is dangerous. Law enforcement, they don't know if they're stopping a guy that just kidnapped or murdered somebody. You put on a badge of any kind and you're accepting a great deal of responsibility and risk. It takes, I think, a special type of public servant to do those types of jobs.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
I'm good, and maybe every once in a while we should say my full name up front. Names are Fitzgerald. And there are a few other Jim Fitzgeralds in the Bureau, agents and analysts, but I'm the only one with the R middle initial, so we'll just put that out there. And we're going to meet our guest in a minute, Barry Black. But beforehand, and I talked to both gentlemen before this, we want to give a shout out and a cautionary, of course, to our troops and our military in the Middle East, quite frankly, all around the world, our foreign service employees in various consulates and diplomat roles, and of course our own FBI and Barry's retired FBI like us, and they're out there domestically and perhaps elsewhere looking for people trying to do us harm. So let's hope everyone stays safe and this thing is over with sooner rather than later in elsewhere in the Middle East. And I know you gentlemen agree with me.
Absolutely.
Barry's a little bit not your ordinary agent, but the one thing about Barry is that, and like myself and Jim, we were Bureau babies from the late 80s. And Barry is one of those rare agents who was on the ground for three of the most significant domestic events of the 1990s. And the thing here is when I look at this, and Barry, we'd like to start out before we get into anything, into some of those areas, we'd like to start out and ask, how the heck, number one, did you wind up in the Bureau? What was your projectile to get there? And we'll talk a little bit more as we get into it, but you're a freaking accountant and you wound up being a sniper. How do you go from crunching numbers to crunching bullets in a 308?
It was a strange road, Ray, as Fitz and you and I were kind of the same vintage. And you may remember back in the day, it was, Jimmy Stewart and the FBI Story, and, Elliot Ness, all those TV shows. I was really just captivated by the mystique, of the FBI, and very influential at a young age. I had a baseball coach, a little league volunteer baseball coach that was an FBI agent. He's a great role model. And I kind of latched onto him at the age of 10 and didn't let go till I was in college. And he finally passed me off to a recruiter. But yeah, you can meet people early on that have a positive influence, and he really kind of fed my interest, and it worked out well for me.
You're one of those rare agents that came in at a very young age. You were just 24 years old. In my eyes, I think you're a baby, because I was 29 and Jim was, how old were you, Jim?
34.
34. So, you were a baby. What is it about, did you think this, when you joined, and you look back at 24, were you ready to what the 90s was going to throw at you?
Well, I was a baby. I remember I showed up at Quantico on a Sunday evening, and they said, okay, your first meeting's at 7:30 tonight. And I walked into that conference room, and there were real live adult, like Green Berets and Army Rangers and litigators and CPAs. I was the baby, and I was the youngest agent when I got orders to Oklahoma. I was the youngest agent in the division for several years. It's a lot of responsibilities, as you both know so well. We had one of the most powerful civilian positions in the country. And it was a lot of responsibility for 24. But I had a great training agent, made a lot of good friends out here, learned a lot from some of the senior guys. And I was very fortunate to have those people around me.
We can explain a little bit about the testing procedures back then, but I tell young people to this day, people like Barry coming in at that age are rare, and we can come back and maybe you came in through the accounting program. I see you
Right.
nodding your head. But what I always tell people, and it was definitely applied to me and Ray, is the Bureau ideally likes to see people, their special agent recruits, with like a mini career before they even come into the FBI. They want to make sure they can, show up on time and dot I's and cross T's, and have the basic workplace scenario understood. But you, Barry, you're only 2 years out of college, basically, and you're down there in Quantico with the people 10 to 12 years older than you. I don't think even in my class, I'm not sure who the youngest was, but definitely, oh, yeah, we had one guy. He was about 24 also. He was a supermarket. He was an accountant also. So in the late 80s, they were definitely looking for accountants, and that's fine how that worked out. So back then, I think it was 5 different categories: language, science, accounting, law, and then I guess general.
Diversified.
They called it
Diversified. Well, it meant something different back then.
Yeah.
And I came in under diversified. No, I wasn't trying to be funny.
Right.
It just was. It was like any other category, not lawyer, accountant, language, everybody else. And it's tougher to compete in that category, Ray, as we know, where Barry, you were only competing in your testing, your interviewing against other accountants. And of course, your background still had to be clean and all that. I'm not taking anything away. You deserve to get in at 24. Good for you. Whether you liked it or not, you were probably with a white collar squad when you got out of Quantico, right?
Right, Fitz. So you're exactly right. I was an engineering student my first year in college, and I was already talking to the recruiters, and I got a pretty rude awakening. She was very blunt and frank, and she said, "We're not hiring engineers. We're hiring accountants and lawyers." So I changed majors, actually changed schools, and moved to a different city to pursue an accounting degree. And they had an accounting test. It was based on the AICPA exam. And if you could pass that, they would waive that additional career requirement, that 3 years of work requirement. So yeah, by passing the test, I got the 3 years waived and showed up at Quantico all bright and shiny at age 24.
Well, let me ask you this. When I came in, and I know when Fitz came in, and I know when you came in, we all have these preconceived notions of what we think the job is going to be versus what it became for each of us, which was different and similar. What was it like for you?
My training agent, you'll remember back when we came in, probation was a year. They've extended it to 2 now. My training agent was hired by J. Edgar Hoover. Wow. He was a Hoover man. Mm-hmm. And he was old school bureau. I was assigned to a white collar squad. So it was a suit and polished wingtips, every day. It was exactly what I thought the FBI was. And I loved it. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Outstanding.
Was Enron before or after you started? Did you have any role in that?
Enron was down in Texas, and it came about shortly after I came in. So the Penn Square Bank failure was just before, and that's when the oil bust occurred. And that's why myself and the other accountants in my new agents class were all sent to Oklahoma and Texas, where the oil industry had failed and the banks were failing. So that's how I ended up in Oklahoma.
So as fun as it was balancing books and looking at other people's debits and credits, and you can talk about that a little bit, but down the line, some other things may have interested you, right? In the Bureau.
Sure. When we're younger, we want a little adventure. And I did enjoy the white collar. I had a case on unsolved mysteries. These were multi-million-dollar international cases, and it was FBI stuff, but it was not as dynamic as what I'd seen in the movies. So Slaughter 2 came open on the division SWAT team, and I thought I'd try out, and I approached the team leader, who was a former Green Beret, a great guy. And he said, "Well, now you're an accountant, right?" And I said, "Well, sure. But if you'll tell me what I need to do, I think I can do it." And he helped me. He was very gracious, and I made the team. And it was a little more exciting than bankruptcy fraud, right? We were arresting some pretty dangerous folks and doing high risk warrants and such. And then I learned of that smaller subset of the SWAT team, which was the sniper observer team. And my training agent, that former Hoover man, he happened to be the team leader. So we had already spent a year together. We got along great. And he said, "I think you might do well." He helped me get selected for sniper school. And then he and I were one of the 2-man teams in our division for several years.
One of the things that Jim and I do, and as you know, we look at a lot of these crimes, and we look at the behavior of the offender, and we look at what's going on underneath. And I want to ask you, from your perspective, did you ever think about the psychology of a person on the other side of your scope? Or was it just purely tactical?
So everybody sees that a little differently. I always relied on the Bureau's deadly force policy. The only time you're going to have to pull that trigger is if somebody else was in imminent danger. I teach now at a university, and some of my students have said, "Well, could you really do that if that person doesn't even know you're there? You're 100 yards away, 200 yards away." Well, if somebody else's life is in danger, then that's a decision you have to make beforehand. You have to know you can do it before you get in that line of work. The psychology never came into my way of thinking.
That's a good, honest answer, and that's quite frankly tactically how it should be.
I agree. I agree.
And you said, and of course, you're talking about a sniper's role. It's if someone else's life is in danger or your own, and that would be
Right.
more of a close-up scenario as opposed to 100 yards away, because ideally maybe they wouldn't be shooting at you 100 yards away if you're in a covered sniper position. But I understand what you're saying there. But the law is deadly force is allowed by law enforcement, or I guess by anyone, if your own life or someone else is in imminent danger. Obviously, you were trained for that, and yeah, it's a whole special breed of law enforcement, certainly military, and a lot of times it's just waiting and you it's a team, and you don't do it by yourself. I know you have other
Absolutely.
people and you have headsets, you're listening, and so that's fascinating there. And I'm not sure if it was that role, certainly SWAT, but I guess we talked about three major domestic events, and I'm trying to think in chronological order
I think
what would have
Waco
been
would
first.
have been first, Waco. And I,
Right.
we look at that, and I think when Waco began, you were probably about 28,
I'd been in the Bureau for 5 years. So, yeah,
28,
right at
29.
28 years old.
So how long did you actually spend at Waco?
Let's back up and explain a little bit.
What?
Waco
Okay.
was the compound in Waco, Texas. Branch Davidians, a religious cult. David Koresh, not his real name, but that's what he called himself. And he had a bunch of people in there, and they were involved with guns. We don't even have to get into ATF. Maybe could have done things differently, but on a Sunday morning, afternoon, they lost 8 agents in a firefight with the Branch Davidians, and they pulled out. The FBI came in, and it became a 50 or so day standoff.
51
So
day.
that's the background. Barry, tell us, you're in Oklahoma City, I guess. You get a call. What happens next?
My wife and I were unpacking from our honeymoon. So
Ah,
we were true newlyweds, and one of her bridesmaids called. We had a home phone. That's how long ago that was. And she said, are you guys okay? We said, well, yeah, we're fine. We'd been overseas. We hadn't seen the news. And she said, well, we saw 4 agents had gotten killed. And I said, whose? And she didn't know. So we turned on CNN, which was the only 24-hour news station around. And the coverage was already starting. The other agency had a failed attempt at a raid. And as you both know, the FBI can deploy within the bounds of the law whenever the president says, go fix it. So basically, that's how we ended up in Waco. I had a pager back then. We didn't really have cell phones. And my little deployment page came across, and my new wife said, now, how is this going to work? What happens? And I said, I'm going to pack for 3 days. Most tactical resolutions are about 3 days. So I said, it may even be over before we cross the Red River down into Texas, but I'll call you when we get there. And so we got to Texas. The FBI had already assumed tactical command, and we had a briefing from one of the other agency's special response team members. And he had taken a shotgun blast from an upper story window. He was still in his BDUs, and I remember his goggles were cracked. He had a tear in his Kevlar, and he proceeded to tell us about the ferocity of fire, the volume of fire they had encountered. So it became pretty real pretty quickly. And of course, negotiators came in. But again, we weren't sure what was going to happen. So we were told they had 50 caliber rifles, among other high powered weapons. So we borrowed some Bradley fighting vehicles, some armor from Fort Hood, not for the weapons on the track vehicle, but just for the armor. And we walked down the safe side of that armor to the closest dirt road intersection to the compound, and we're told to hold. And that's where the 51 days started for me.
Wow. You were
and you're
there the
still
entire time, that whole 51 days?
Yes. Yeah. Back in the day, you'll remember you had 35 millimeter wedding photos taken. Well, our photographer wanted his proofs back. So my wife said, well, gee, my husband's down at the Waco thing. He's like, well, I want my pictures. So my sniper buddy, his wife drove my new wife to Waco, and we picked our wedding pictures out at a Holiday Inn in Waco.
how romantic.
Yeah. Memories.
That'll be in the movie when it comes out. I mean, we're joking here, but of course it was a very serious situation. You're right.
Absolutely.
CNN was a news station back then, and they were covering it full time. I was covering leads in New York. I went out and talked to some biblical scholar at one of the universities, and because they were debating chapters of the Bible with Koresh, and when he asked this question, how do we respond to this one? Ray, I'm not sure if there are any leads in Philly you had to cover.
There were.
And just people that may have known Koresh, whatever. So we're doing our best in the field to help you there, and you guys. I guess they brought in tents and trailers and you guys were like in a bivouac situation, I suppose.
Yeah. So it was about a 12-hour shift with an hour on each end for a brief and debrief. And then we had rooms at a local hotel chain. But back then, as you both know well, the Bureau was not set up for any kind of a protracted situation. So, we didn't have government credit cards. There was no cash advance for a deployment. And, we were there weeks and weeks. So finally, Quantico sent out a pay trailer. And every other Thursday, we would line up inside the perimeter, but outside the range of that 50 caliber, and sign for enough money to pay all of our expenses. And then at the end, do a 51-day voucher. Yeah. So the logistics were crazy, just everything from food, because you're there 12 hours, you got to eat something. So it was mostly MREs, which I think were from like the Korea vintage, but it was something to eat.
What is the rhythm like? Give me a typical day. What's your rhythm like? I mean, is it Groundhog Day?
After a while, it was like being on a cruise. You forget what day it is. You just go and you do the same thing. As the situation evolved, we're regional responses. The teams closer to Waco were first. That's how we got down there. But then you can't stay fresh that long. So some teams rotated out, but we were the closest one logistically. Well, then the hostage rescue team, HRT, was deployed. The negotiators did a fantastic job. Their job is difficult, but different than the tactical positions are. So they were trying everything they could to negotiate. One day after HRT had arrived, one of their Bradleys approached our position. The back ramp dropped and an operator got out with a little girl. And I remember vividly, he handed her to me and I carried her over to a child welfare agent. And she was scared, so I was talking to her, but that was the last child that got out alive. And as the perimeter began to shrink, things were progressing. The field snipers, were paired up with an HRT sniper. So they would deploy me in one of the Bradleys to a small, it was a garage, a cinder block garage behind the compound. And I would spend 3 or 4 days there until somebody would rotate out. Yeah, this was unprecedented. This type of thing had never happened before. The planning was there, but just the protracted nature had never occurred.
Yeah, finally, it was 51 days. The go was given to breach the compound, and they put in some kind of a gas that was supposedly, and Janet Reno was the AG. She approved it because kids were apparently being sexually molested. And then these breaching machines took down walls and gunfire started, and most of it coming out. And then I'm telling the story. I wasn't there. You were. I'm just trying to give the audience a summary. And then fire started in multiple places. And then it really went to shit from there.
Well, it was April 19th, 1993. And you have to imagine this. There's movies about it. I'm sure many people have seen this. This compound was huge, wooden structure with a big kind of watchtower in the center. There was a buried bus, which was sort of a refuge. And in the center was a large cinder block room. And when the fires erupted, it's the plains of Texas. It was windy, it's flat. And the speed with which that whole place just became an inferno was really unbelievable. So our team went down. It was still smoldering, and it was just razed to the ground, except for that cinder block area. In that area, there was one door, one opening. There was no door. And it was about hip high on me in debris, but the walls were just ringed with long guns. You could see the barrels of long guns. And that's where most of the women and children were recovered, were under that debris in that kind of last refuge.
When you say recovered,
they were dead.
Yes.
Nobody survived that by design. A lot of the kids had been murdered.
It was suicide by cop.
Well, and Koresh himself, it was a gunshot wound to the head. And one of the forensic pathologists I'd work with later, it was close contact. Now, whether he did it himself or he had a group called the Mighty Men, the biblical reference to the Mighty Men, we may never know. But he didn't suffer with burning to death or smoke inhalation like some of his followers.
Did your perception of Koresh change over time?
Ray, no, not at all. I mean, the intel we got about how that group was operated and the reason that the first agency went in to begin with. And again, I guess like my first answer, there was a job that needed to be done, and the warrants were legal. The original warrants were legal, and we were there with the law on our side. You never want there was an assault plan, of course, but as it went on and the children were there and the president, Clinton, was new, the attorney general, Janet Reno, was new. So that's when you saw the CEVs, the combat engineering vehicles, knocking some holes in the walls because we believed the doors had been barricaded. And we had loudspeakers telling people, come on out. We're not going to hurt you. It was really something unprecedented.
Let me ask you this. Did Waco change you personally, or do you think it just changed the Bureau?
It definitely changed the Bureau. And, looking back, when you fast forward to the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh was there. It's just odd that he was there and I was there. That's just strange to me still. That was by far the largest tactical movement I'd been a part of because it was one of the largest the Bureau had ever seen. But no, I can't say that it changed me. I mean, that's what those kinds of jobs are, and somebody has to do them. So, we have all raised our hand and taken an oath to do that kind of job. So that was just my I didn't do anything special. It was just, I did my little part with the other teams, and there were multiple teams there, HRT, everybody did their part.
Ray, I want to hear about Oklahoma City next, but I'll never forget working in New York and, of course, monitoring the whole Waco situation. And I remember telling a few people, and Ray, you and I are both from Philadelphia, we went through both MOVE confrontations, including the one in 86, where a whole city block was burned down, Osage Avenue. I remember telling a few people in New York, whatever they do, whenever they make this raid, I hope they have like helicopters or these planes nearby that carry water in case things catch on fire. I didn't know they'd catch on fire themselves or not. And I'm not saying that would have resolved all the issues. I'm sure there still would have been deaths, but maybe just to pour some water or fire retardant, whatever it is, over that complex would have maybe saved some lives. Nothing to do with you, Barry. I'm just saying, in retrospect, armchair quarterbacking, although I was saying it, beforehand too. Go ahead.
Well, we had firefighters there, but
they couldn't get to the scene.
When people are shooting at you, the firefighters aren't real eager to go down there. And plus, was it safe? Because, this was the speed with which that thing went up too. And the firefighters were in an outer perimeter because of those 50 caliber rounds. There were some very difficult decisions made by the decision makers.
I get it. We're not going to get, did you play any role in Ruby Ridge?
That was before me.
That was before you, right? So Ruby Ridge, then Waco, which of course then led to Oklahoma City. Ruby Ridge was a standoff with the U.S. Marshals that the FBI got involved to. At least the son of the individual and his wife were both killed, and it was just a mess. And then, there's two sort of a number of anti-government movements developing at this time. And then April 19th, coincidentally, Hitler's birthday and the anniversary of Waco, Oklahoma City occurs. And I know a little bit about you heard it go off, didn't you? You were in the city.
Well, yes, I was April 19th, 2 years after the fire in Waco.
95.
And that was no coincidence that McVeigh picked that day. His fake ID, that was the date he used for his fake birthday, was April 19th. Big key day for him. But I was still on the SWAT team at the time, and I had a warrant for a fugitive. So we thought he was going to be on an Air Force base. Myself and another operator were sitting waiting for this guy to come out of a building, and detonation occurred. It registered 3.2 on the Richter scale, like an earthquake. It was loud. And I remember thinking, now the SWAT team trains at Fort Sill, which is an artillery post. So we'd been down there when they're firing some of the really big guns, but they don't have artillery on an Air Force base. And that, I was just processing that. And that's when we had the secure radios, and I still had a SWAT pager back then. And both of those kind of lit up, and I said, something has happened downtown. Well, it's very flat here in Oklahoma as well. So I looked back to the west, and there was this giant black cloud already starting to blow kind of slowly across downtown. And then our ERT, the evidence response team, was brand new back then. I'd helped start it here. And the ASAC, he said, go do whatever it is you do. Those were the orders, because other than the first Trade Center attack in New York, large vehicle-borne IEDs were not on the radar at all. So we were first thinking, plane crash or gas main explosion. But I got downtown. That nation was at 9:02. I got downtown about 9:30, and there was a 32-foot crater in the street, dead center of the building. The front half was just gone. Cars were burning. 300 buildings had been damaged. It was chaos.
But if I can interrupt you, this was also personal to you, right?
Well,
because
very
of your
personal.
Wife. Because I'm for a number of reasons. But didn't your wife work in the Murrah building?
So my wife, who had just sat through the whole Waco thing with me. We met because she was a federal probation officer. That's how we met and dated and engaged and married in Waco. I went to bomb school in 94. So I was away again for training at the FBI's hazardous devices school. And then the following April was the bombing. She and her coworkers had driven out of the building at 9:00, 2 minutes before. And I didn't know that. So she had the foresight to page me back into my own voicemail, which was our office was remote. It wasn't in the Murrah building. And she said that, she was okay. They had left at 9:00, but they were all at their relocation station, so yeah, that was disconcerting. And you'll remember when you got paper paychecks. So every other Thursday, I was in the building, and a lot of the tellers were young ladies about my age. So we would chat and talk, and they were all killed. Other agents that didn't survive from some other agencies. So it was very personal.
Yeah, you mentioned 94. You were in bomb tech school, and you became a bomb technician. Going from a sniper to a bomb technician is really a rare transition, at least in my estimation, because as a sniper, you're running towards something, and then as a bomb technician, you're kind of running away from something. So was it harder to take a shot or deciding which wire to cut?
Well, they're the same but different. You're right. In one, it's a team. You're part of a cohesive unit. And in the other, you're kind of down there by yourself. The team's behind you, but they were both challenging, both challenges. All of this, I wanted to just see if I could do it. Can I get in the FBI at 24? Can I get on the SWAT team? Can I be a sniper? And this was another challenge. I didn't even know the FBI had bomb technicians until Waco. That's where I met the first bomb tech, and he described what that job entails. And I was fascinated and raised my hand and got selected. And then the career took a whole different turn.
Let me ask you this about, I've never been to bomb tech school. I have some friends that were police officers that went to the school down in, I think it's in Alabama, is it?
Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah, right. What does a bomb school teach you about fear?
Well, again, just like with the SWAT team or sniper school, it's very personal, very subjective.
Yeah.
But you guys were FBI agents. You rely on your training, right? You rely on what you've been taught. And that school, even in 1994, it has changed exponentially now with technology and huge infusion of capital. But, I was an accountant, knew nothing about explosives, but they taught you everything you need to know. And a lot of it is judgment, which you learn with experience. But as far as the tools go, we were still using some homemade tools back in 94, wet film X-ray that was actually made by Polaroid, back with the little roller. And of course, now it's a lot of remote tools, digital X-ray. And it was that evolution of technology that kept me so interested.
Barry, let's get an early plug. You wrote a book about your career and certainly your bomb tech days, and it's called Hazardous Devices. I like the title. It could either be a rom-com about teenagers or a real live FBI bomb tech. And real quick, is it basically you're going over your career and then part of the cases you worked that we're discussing right now?
Fitz, that's it exactly. It's how I got in the bureau, which was not the norm. And then this kind of odd transition from accounting to sniper to bomb tech. And as the world changed after 9/11, I was at ground zero for 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Bureau recognized me as a master bomb technician, a master police instructor, just from experience.
And a half decent accountant, right?
And a decent accountant, yeah. So I got to do a lot of international travel. I worked on every continent except Antarctica, former Soviet Union, throughout Europe, the Middle East several times, Africa, I think 5 times. And it was fascinating. I learned something every time. So in the book, it's the cases, it's the culture. We would eat, snakes and guinea pigs or whatever they had there because we were embedded with the locals. I learned a lot. So it's a little bit of travel, a little bit of foodie stuff, a little bit of the cases, and sort of some historic events that I had a small part in.
So you pull up to the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, and I guess it's organized mayhem, at least for the first few hours. And then obviously it's about rescue at that point of anyone. And I know there were at least a few people pulled out of the wreckage, but what was the total? Like 180 people died?
168 people lost their lives.
And young kids, and of course
19 children.
And young women, and just a terrible event. This could be a whole separate podcast, but I know Timothy McVeigh and and everyone did great work on that. But I'll never forget, I'm a former uniformed police officer in Bensalem Township, and everybody wants to make that one car stop of the really bad guy. I got a few bad guys in my time, but it was an Oklahoma State trooper or just pulled a car kind of suspicious, and it was Timothy McVeigh. His story didn't add up right. And I always wonder if that car stop wasn't made, how much more difficult or how much longer would have taken to identify him. I know there's some clues in the U-Haul truck, et cetera, with the VIN, but yeah, just an amazing story. So was your job to look? I guess your job was to try to go to literally ground zero where the U-Haul truck was. It wasn't U-Haul. What was the company? Was it Ryder?
Ryder truck. Yeah,
Ryder truck, and then just try to. And it's amazing to me. Even arson investigators, they can go to a big building. Oh, the fire started right here. But I guess with your training, and this isn't what I do or that Ray's done, but I know to go to people who can do this stuff when necessary. Then I'm sure you found exactly where it was. Of course, there were videos also that came out later of the actual truck, I believe, detonating. So yeah, just you have your equipment, you're trying to pick up material, gather evidence. Is that what your goal is as a bomb tech on a scene like this?
In 1995, we really had no equipment. The bomb tech program was always kind of a stepchild until these things began to occur. And then we got an infusion of money and some additional training, additional equipment. But in that post-blast role, ideally we'll perform some kind of render safe so the bomb doesn't detonate. But in a post-blast role, it's just to determine, was it a bomb or was it the plane crash or gas main explosion that we were initially told, and try to isolate the evidence, because all that chaos that you mentioned, Fitz, still has to happen. We're not going to prevent paramedics or rescue workers from extracting people because we might lose some evidence. We can get the evidence. The lab even now can detect explosive residue down to the picogram. So the evidence will be there. But you have to work with those other first responders. My first role was to just do what we call a site survey. And I walked the entire perimeter of the building. A little of that was looking for my wife or somebody that could tell me where she was. But you assess the situation. You look for a blast pattern. There was a playground for the kids, 15 of the 19 children that died in America's Kids Daycare. And so there was a little playground on what was the second story from the north side, the north base of the building. And I was there with a trooper. It's loud. It's just mayhem. It is hard to
and it's still dangerous. It's still dangerous.
Oh, it's still dangerous.
Yeah. Part of the building.
Which was my point, is I saw everybody flee in the building. All the first responders were running and screaming something, but there were helicopters overhead. We couldn't really hear them. And then finally we heard second bomb. Well, the FBI trains us and our partners about secondary devices and even, tertiary devices. So I look at this trooper and we're like, how do we get down from here? Well, still today on the east side of that building is a row of trees. So we kind of made the giant stride to one of those trees, shimmied down that, went to one of the far side of a bomb truck and waited for some intel. Well, what had happened, some of the rescue workers had found a large wooden crate that had explosive markings on it and did exactly what they should do is retreat. So we sent Bureau trained techs in, recovered this giant wooden crate, put it in a special, it's called a single vent trailer, which is all we had at the time, and took it out to a range where I knew some people, it was the county sheriff's range. Well, when I got to it, in the crate appeared to be a tow missile. Well, the obvious question, why is there a tow missile in the federal building? So our standard operating procedures, if military ordnance is involved, that's the military's problem, Well, we work with them closely. So I called the captain over the explosive ordnance disposal unit at Fort Sill, which is about 60 miles away. He knew what had happened. I said, I think we're looking at a tow missile, but I need you to come up. So he sent a team up. They examined it and said, yep, this is a tow missile, but it's completely inert. It's weighted correctly. Everything's there except the warhead. Something's wrong. So we had to use the serial number on the tube. These are fire and forget kind of weapons, so there's usually just a tube left over. But we traced the serial number back to Redstone Arsenal, where it had been fired in training, and then worked backwards from there. Another federal agency had reconfigured it as part of a sting operation. So that second bomb, that it stalled the recovery efforts for about a half hour until we got it, figured out and at least out of the way. Yeah, but all the paperwork obviously had been destroyed. Nobody was around to tell us hey, that's mine. It's just one of those crazy stories, and there are a million.
When I looked at this case when it happened, I was amazed and thought how fantastic the Bureau is with the speed and accuracy in which they were able to bring closure to this, which doesn't always happen. But the location of that rear axle to that rental vehicle, that rental truck, was that the locals that found that, or was that our lab people?
So again, it's all hands on deck. Everybody with a badge and a gun was coming to Oklahoma City. And that's actually how the trooper, Charlie Hanger, came upon Timothy McVeigh's car. He was heading southbound into town, but his dispatch said, hey, we still got patrol responsibilities, so turn back around and go north. So as he was going back north, McVeigh passed him and had no license plate on his car. So that's how that happened. But yeah, everybody's downtown. Pre-existing relationships, as you know, are important. We worked well with our state and local partners, and there was a reserve deputy sheriff who saw that. I mean, this is several hundred pounds of twisted steel, but he said, "Hey, you need to come look at this." And he spit on his finger, wiped away some grease, and there was the confidential VIN. So my partner who got me in the bomb tech program, you'll remember the little green government memo pads we always used to carry. Yeah. Sure. So I pulled out my little memo pad and the deputy called out the number. My partner, Jim, wrote it down. I wrote it down. We called it out to one another to make sure there were no errors and, no cell phones. So he tore his note out of his little pad, gave it to a runner, and they took it to the command post and began the trace. And that CVIN came back to Ford. We contacted Ford. This was before the days of InfraGard. But we had contacts at Ford Motor Company. And they said, we built that truck for Ryder Rental. So we contacted Ryder Rental. They said, yep, that's one of ours. It belongs to a place called Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas. So we sent agents up there, interviewed Eldon Elliott. I flew up a sketch artist, and that's how we got the sketch of John Doe 1 and John Doe 2.
John Doe 2 is still in question after all these years, exactly.
Never. No, actually, we spent about 8,000 man hours, and we know who he is. So he was a soldier that had been at Mr. Elliott's body shop on a different day. He was assigned to Fort Riley. Yeah, we found him, interviewed him, and I just had nothing to do with it. But those are the things you have to resolve. You can't have that open, maybe another guy out there kind of question.
But there are still some conspiracy aspects of that.
Oh, absolutely.
And who else did McVeigh work with? We can move on, but I just want to ask one more question. I think our audience will want to know this. 2 parts, and it's about your wife. Was she scheduled to leave at 9 o'clock that morning? And was with her office, I hate to bring back these memories and the what ifs and what could have been, was her office destroyed, and did she lose colleagues from the federal probation?
So the federal family, as we call it, is pretty close knit. So the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was across the street from what they call the old post office building. That's where Machine Gun Kelly was tried. So a lot of federal offices were in the building across the street to the south, and they're connected by a subterranean tunnel. But all of the government vehicles and my wife's personal vehicle were parked there. So a little shortly before 9, she and 2 other officers left the old post office building, came through the tunnel, got in the government car, left through the west exit, and then drove in front of the bomb. So their office was not there either. It was the building behind, but both buildings were closed because of damage. Yes, to answer your question, nobody from the probation office lost their life.
Still too close for comfort, nonetheless. So I think we may have crossed paths, if not directly, indirectly, because you were involved in the Olympic bombings in Atlanta in 1996. I didn't go to the scene. Well, it was one bombing that day, but then subsequent bombings, of course, occurred. What was the Southeast? What was the bureau's name for it? Southeast bomb.
Scent bomb. Centennial bombing. It was a Centennial Park bombing.
There's been so many bureau acronyms, I lose track of them after a while. Yeah. But I got involved a little bit later with the hunt for Richard Jewell in western North Carolina.
Eric Rudolph.
Richard Jewell was the early suspect. Sorry. Right. I was not involved with Richard Jewell or the hunt for him at all. I came in for Eric Rudolph after that. Thank you. But tell us your role in, did you go to Atlanta for the bombing?
So, as you know, we have National Special Security Events in SSEs. Before that acronym was a real thing, the Bureau had responsibility for attacks at major events, counterterrorism attacks and such. Oak Bomb was the case name for the Oklahoma City bombing. And my unit was called the Critical Incident Response Group. So I'd been working 6 or 7 days a week, really 14-hour days because we live here. They were bringing other people in, but we all had a vested interest. So my buddy at SERG, who was running that unit, he said, "Look, we know you've been working, a lot since the day of the bombing. We still have a need for national security events. And we know you're from Birmingham, Alabama." He remembered my parents were still there. He goes, "Look, if you can get away kind of for a little break, why don't you go work the Olympics? We'll assign you to the soccer venue in Birmingham. You can see your folks and kind of get away from Oak Bomb for a bit." Well, that sounded pretty good. So we did all the event security for the counter ID portion of it. And I was sitting at a little bar and cafe in downtown Birmingham with some Olympic officials, and the bartender came out and said, "What about that bomb at Centennial Park?" I said, that's not really funny. He goes, "No, really." And CNN again, he flipped on the TV and the coverage started. And I had a cell phone by then. Phone rang, said, "Get to Atlanta," which was about a 2.5 hour drive. So our teams that were in Atlanta worked that post-blast scene, and myself and my team backfilled their responsibilities through the final closing ceremonies.
Did it appear from Oklahoma City? Now I know the bombings were technically different, but they're both, I would consider, to be domestic terror events. Did you think the tactics seemed to be evolving based on Oklahoma City and then Atlanta?
The mission for those two terrorists was different. McVeigh just hated the government. Eric Rudolph was more a fundamentalist type of person. He used a pipe bomb with a steel plate in the back to direct the shrapnel into the crowd. McVeigh had basically a 5,000-pound indiscriminate bomb. Terrorism looks the same sometimes, but it was orders of magnitude different.
Take a look when you started and you were a sniper in Waco, and the adjustments the Bureau was making during these events. I mean, you have, in a period of about 4 years, you have 3 major events. I mean, I saw it. I want to get your perspective.
Are we counting New York City, the first World Trade Center bombing?
Well, that's 93. So yeah, I mean,
right.
What would, that's 4. And I mean, and plus there's others around the world. I mean, the Port of Aden, what was that? With a bombing there with the U.S. naval ship. What was that, 90?
I was Yemen.
Yemen. In the Port of Aden?
I don't remember the date. But they do.
They're all running together, I started seeing the Bureau adjust in some of the things they did down in SERG with bomb techs, with a lot of specialty groups, as you might call them. They start spending a lot more time with that. Did you see that too, Barry?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Our team, the bomb techs are only about 200, 220 in the FBI at any one time. But we drew much closer to our state and local partners. We certify all the individual bomb technicians in the country, and we rely on them as force multipliers. So we spent a great deal of time with our state and local partners. And then, as you mentioned, that international terrorism piece began to grow. We worked closely with our military as well. I ended up as an instructor for NATO, for instance, teaching NATO soldiers about sensitive site exploitation, because we learned you can dispatch the low guy on the totem pole that's putting down a roadside bomb, but if we can figure out who's designing them and making them, then that's a teach a man to fish kind of moment. So we would work with our soldiers and NATO soldiers to impress the value of that kind of evidence through TDAC, which was established because of this very issue you're bringing up, the Terrorist Explosive Analytical Devices Center, which is also down at Redstone. So absolutely, my 31 years, I think it was nothing I did. It was just not a normal time. And I was just sort of in the place where a lot of that change occurred.
Yeah, you mentioned Critical Incident Response Group. The acronym is SERG. That was formed by Director Louis Free after first Ruby Ridge, then Waco. And the command structure wasn't set up ideally. And in Waco, there were some problems with different special agents in charge of the HRT, the hostage rescue team, others of the negotiators, others probably from the bomb technicians like yourself. And Louis Free said, no, we got to bring that all under one roof. And that included the profilers too. That goes by different names, but the behavioral science unit back then, now it's the BAU. And that's when I was in New York, I put in for under SERG. They were bringing 18 new profilers in at once, and that's how I got my promotion to there. So yeah, I think that was a great idea on the part of Director Louis Free to create SERG. It's still in existence now, going strong when there's one boss over SERG, and he or she can then delegate what's going to happen in a place, and have different SACs arguing over turf and all kinds of power and control issues. So it makes a lot more sense that way, and it was a great morphing. Maybe it could have happened a few years earlier. It didn't, but that's where it was then. So yeah. So I know the early days of of the Atlanta bombings. They thought it was Richard Jewell who was the suspect. I think that's where the term person of interest was coined. I never heard it before then, but there's a few movies about that. Clint Eastwood directed a movie, but then I got involved when Eric Rudolph was was seen running from the Birmingham bombing. I'm sure that's really close to home for you.
Right.
The abortion clinic, a police officer was killed there, a nurse seriously injured, but luckily someone saw a guy running away, jumping into a truck, copied the tag down, and then everything focused on Western North Carolina after that in the hunt for Eric Rudolph. So I always say about bombers, they evolve. You mentioned that a little bit earlier. The Unabomber certainly did, and the devices can get stronger, more complex, complicated. The timing devices, whether it's sensor or a timer of some sort. So were you seeing that? And I guess you examined each device because there was the Olympic bombing, then I think the other side bar, where I think that was when the secondary device was there too. And some police officers were injured like 30 minutes after the first device went off.
Well, and Ray mentioned the psychology of these things.
Sure.
That does come into play.
Oh, yeah.
When a device comes apart, the bits and pieces that go flying are considered fragmentation. But when you add nails like Rudolph did, that's considered shrapnel. It's designed to kill people and do property damage. So that tells you a lot about a bomber's intent. And then when you start finding secondary devices that are located where first responders are likely to gather, that also goes a long way towards intent. And again, just another amazing bit of training I was afforded. A small group of us got to go to England and work with the British military on their response capabilities for large vehicle-borne IEDs, truck bombs, that they encountered in Northern Ireland. And that experience brought a whole new, more of a military way to address these things, as far as things we call them arrival drills, things you need to do immediately. And part of that is that sweep for secondary devices. So it definitely changes. We learned at that school that some of the IRA or provisional IRA bombers would watch the British bomb techs and how they prepared or rendered a device safe, and would build devices to defeat that measure. And we saw that after the Boston Marathon bombing, and not so much the pressure cooker bombs, but the types of pipe bombs they used subsequently during the manhunt, for instance. And it was designed to defeat our tools. So I had, again, the privilege to work with our R&D unit, just incredibly brilliant scientists, and we developed a specialized tool to defeat that particular type of device. We got a patent for it, gave the patent to the Bureau, and now that tool's being used. So it's a cat and mouse game. They watch what we do and change. We encounter those devices, so we change. Again, the technology is fascinating.
I want to ask you two things here. So it's a two-part question. As a master police instructor, you have the ability to touch probably hundreds of lives. If you had to look at it, what do you think young agents that you're teaching and police officers misunderstand about bomb work?
It's incredibly dangerous. I think there's a lot of movies where you walk away in slow motion and there's the giant fireball. It's just not like that. You have a split second to make a decision, and it's right or wrong, and you know immediately if it's wrong. It's dangerous work. The work we all do is dangerous. Law enforcement, they don't know if they're stopping a guy that just kidnapped or murdered somebody. You put on a badge of any kind, and you're accepting a great deal of responsibility and risk. It takes, I think, a special type of public servant to do those types of jobs.
So working as a bomb technician, what's the one mindset lesson that you want your guys to walk away with that's going to keep them alive?
Treat everyone like it's real. We in this country are fortunate that most bomb calls statistically are either not a call at all. I was at the Democrat convention in LA. We got a call. Turned out to literally be a box of cats left out in front of one of the VIP hotels. So many of these calls, our state and local partners and even the Bureau will roll on aren't anything, or they're a hoax. There's no way they could detonate. But when you show up, you don't know. It's important that you treat every device as if it's real, just like you treat every handgun as if it's loaded, because you don't know until you know.
We're going to wind up here. We really appreciate your time, Barry. But not only you can tell us a little bit more about your book, Hazardous Devices and How to Get It, But I understand you launched the book at the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum just a few weeks ago, really? Tell us how all that came about. And why
Well,
didn't you even
Fitz,
write the book?
I I was gone a lot when my son was coming up. Uh, you guys traveled a lot as well, and I have friends in the military. They're gone for much longer periods than I was. But as he grew up, I wanted him to know eventually why I was gone. And some of these transits, I worked in Kathmandu and Mogadishu, and some of these you're flying for 30 hours. So on the planes, I would just kind of tap out just for my own memory what we were doing. Did we do anything cool? See something different. Like I got to go great white shark diving when I was teaching the South African police. You got to take advantage of these things. So
In between diffusing bombs, you're
What's more
diving with
dangerous?
sharks. Yeah.
What's more dangerous?
A
Sharks or
shark with a
bombs?
bomb hooked to it, right?
Exactly, the Sharknado, right? Yeah, I love the adventure, and I got to do a lot of amazing things. But I wrote this mostly for him. He's 25 now, and if he's not interested, maybe his kids will be. But I had it just these crazy, disparate stories on the back of envelopes, or when we finally got a laptop, and stuck it in a drawer when I retired in 2019, and just truly didn't know what to do with it as far as getting it published. But I teach now at a local university at a forensic science institute, and McFarland, a publisher, contacted me about writing a forensic science textbook, which sounds like a lot of work, and I'm retired. That's just way too hard for me. And I said, well, we can talk about that, but I do have this compilation of stories. Would you be interested in that? And at first they said no. So they read a couple, then asked for a couple more, and eventually said, you know what? Yeah, we'll publish this. And that's how that came to be. And as far as the memorial downtown, Oklahoma City is a special place, and it came together in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing. There's a beautiful national memorial and museum on the site of the bombing. And I give a lot of talks down there still. And so when the book came out in late January, the folks at the memorial said, we'd like to host a book launch for you. And they had a little luncheon, and the TV stations were there. It turned into quite a little thing that I was not expecting. But I really appreciated the sentiment. And as I said, I feel close to those people and that memorial as a whole.
How can people get the book if they want it?
It's available on Amazon. It's Hazardous Devices, Memoir of an FBI Bomb Technician, Accountant, and Sniper. But if you just type in Barry T. Black on Amazon, it'll pop right up. Barnes & Noble, really wherever books are sold. And I'm amazed it's out there, but it's really out there.
And is there a website that maybe people can get signed copies if they want?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It's barryblackokc.com. And there's a little bit of my background. The book's available through that website. I do some corporate speaking and speaking for other federal agencies. So it's a retirement kind of thing. And I think you got to stay engaged. You guys do a great job reaching out like this. And I enjoy the university teaching and the speaking that comes up periodically. But yeah, the website's a great way, or just straight from Amazon to get the book.
Outstanding. Most of the audience wanted to know, Barry, if your experience, how your experiences compare to what they see on TV and in movies made about bomb technicians.
It's Hollywood's Hollywood. The Hurt Locker was a great movie. Some of it's just not that realistic, but the stressful part, the life-threatening part, a lot of it is true to life. And the newer shows have people like you for profiling, or bomb techs or tactical operators on scene to bring a little bit of realism. So it's not too far off, except for some of the more extreme and fantastic types of things.
Could I close with one specific question to you, Barry? I want you to think about it before you answer. You've been retired about 7 years now from the Bureau?
Yes.
What would you be more comfortable doing right now? Diffusing an IED, improvised explosive device, or doing a corporate CEO's taxes?
I think the downside is
either one could blow up on you when you think about it.
Either one, but yeah, the IED part is pretty is permanent. The tax thing, you'll get out of prison.
And I don't think you could have answered in a better way. Ray, a final few words, and I'll take us out.
Barry, I'm very impressed. You stood watch at Waco. You dug in the rumble of Oklahoma City, and you ran toward danger in Atlanta. Hats off to you. Thank you for your service. Not many people can walk in your shoes. Thank you so much. for joining
Well,
us.
you're kind, Ray. It really is nothing I did. There are hundreds of other people that do the same thing every day, but I appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, and ditto here, Barry. And you made your service, and of course your family sacrifice too while you're away. We can all relate to that. Everyone, and again, mostly tonight, Barry, check out Hazardous Devices at anywhere you can buy books, and I think you'll have a good read. Get him on his website. We'll have that on our website and you can get some signed books from him too. So everyone, again, thanks for watching or listening to this episode of Cold Red. Please subscribe, like, and share anything you can about us. The website, of course, is coldredpodcast.com. Thanks to Matt McLaughlin, Matt Robinson, our producers, Rick Schilling, our music coordinator, and to everyone else out there, thank you for listening or watching this episode of Cold Red.